I've got a long slide deck here to show you that is going to cover a lot of things. And at the same time, I want this to be a little more interactive than some of the sessions I've been to. So if anyone has a question while I'm talking, don't hesitate to interrupt me. And because this is getting filmed to get put on the internet later, I would really like it if people could go up to the microphones when they have to talk. Otherwise, I have to repeat every question, which is not fun for me. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is about the future of advertising, and I don't know who I've got in the room. So how many of you know something about advertising, and how many, raise your hands. Excellent. How many of you are novices that just are trying to learn and trying to figure it out? Okay. So I'll try to make sure there's something for everybody. At Microsoft, I work on the future of advertising. I'm in charge of our long-term ad technology strategy for ad platforms, ad formats, things like that. And I've been in the online advertising industry for a long time, since about 1997. So I figured before I talk about the future of advertising, I'd talk first a little bit about the present of advertising and get a little bit of a grounding. So I'm going to talk a little bit through the evolution of this market and where things are slowly headed, and then a little bit more about where things will quickly be headed in the future. So we've got up on the screen here a couple of bullets and a graph. This is really talking about ad spending growth. Overall, advertising grows about 5% a year. So if you look at all advertising, worldwide, that's about $750 billion of ad spend. But in each country, it grows a little bit differently, usually kind of aligned to the gross national product. In the US, it grows about 5% annually. And within that growth rate, we've got some distribution. So there's a whole bunch of different types of media, everything from television and print to out-of-home and then online. And even within online, we've kind of got two gross buckets that we break things down to, one for search and the other for display advertising. So if you look at this chart, what it's really showing is percentage growth over the years of ad spend. And it's a little misleading in that what we're really talking about is percentage growth, not overall total top dollar growth. So if I jump to this next slide, you'll see that this is looking at actual spend, not percentage growth, but dollars. And all media are growing, and this is a US slide, are growing every year. So really what we're talking about is with that 5% of growth, it's getting distributed out disproportionately to online advertising as opposed to traditional advertising. That's a little bit misleading. Because of the way that revenue gets allocated. So if we look out, this is a theoretical chart here. If we look out into the future, what we'll see slowly is, according to the way that analysts count money, the dollar spend in things like television and newspapers and radio and out-of-home advertising, which is like billboards, those will drop and online will continue to grow. It's a little misleading because what we're really talking about is distribution mechanisms. So if you think about the way that television moved from being distributed mostly over broadcast over the air and then slowly and then more quickly moved to cable and satellite, we didn't start counting the dollars that the original broadcast networks had against cable and satellite. So ABC, their revenues have always been attributed to broadcast TV, even though they're distributing over other mechanisms. So if we look at the way that it would break out the way the analysts count things, they're really talking about moving them mostly into the online display bucket, because television content that's distributed over the internet will be distributed via how the analysts count things, via the online display column there. But it's really, again, a little misleading, because should we be counting views of the NewYorkTimes.com as a completely separate bucket from the New York Times print newspaper? I think ultimately not. So we'll see how they resolve that. So advertising is a very large, very fragmented, very inefficient market. So if we look at the ecosystem level, approximately 6,000 advertisers worldwide spend about 80% of all the dollars in advertising, which is not very many, especially when you think of the millions of advertisers that are burgeoning onto online ad spend, especially through search. And in the US, about 5,000 account for about 90% of the ad spend. Most of the worldwide ad spend is now controlled by about 5 agencies, 6 if you count Dentsu, which essentially owns the Japanese market. So we've got these 5 major holding companies that control the majority of the ad spend in the entire world. And there's sort of a lens effect that happens with that. At the same time, about 60 companies worldwide control the majority of the publisher economics. And each of those has thousands of holdings. So we're talking about a global ecosystem that's fragmented with a lot of consolidation. There's continued consolidation happening. And in the middle of all that, there are hundreds of vendors across thousands of implementations between their own implementations and IT implementations. So we're talking about a pretty complex marketplace with a lot of people involved. And the part that's complicated from an IT or a technology or software perspective is that none of these systems talk to each other very well. They're all very, very disparate. There's a lot of manual work that goes on in this space. So I'm going to talk to you about how today, and this is a little bit specific to online display advertising, but this is how the market actually deals with the process of buying and selling media. And you'll see as I walk through it, it's pretty inefficient. So it starts out with a media buyer or media planner who sits down and starts figuring out how they're going to spend the dollars of an advertiser. They work with the advertiser to figure out what the goals of the campaign are, and then they start looking at the properties of various websites that have a certain size audience and a certain demographic of audience that they think are going to map pretty well to the goals of the advertiser. And then, pretty much, they pick up the phone and start making phone calls. So they negotiate a buy across however many publishers they think they can handle across the course of this campaign, and they start looking for volume of people to start sending ads in front of. If the sale is done, then internally on both sides, they would hand that off to a sales planner and an associate media buyer. And that's where they start putting things into the media planning and buying workflow system and the sales workflow systems. The next step would be that the campaign would get trafficked out to the publisher. So that would literally be the act of taking some ads and sending them over. That can be done manually, via email usually, or it can be done through an automated workflow system that most of the bigger agencies use. An example of one would be Atlas Media Console, which Microsoft now owns, or DoubleClick Dart for advertisers. Those are the 2 big ones. Once the ads arrive at the publisher, the ad operations person would put things into their own campaign workflow system. And that's all manual. It's usually cutting and pasting and then typing some things in manually. Once the campaign is actually running, somebody on the advertiser or the agency side has to sit there and start looking at reports. Now, they're going to look at reports typically out of their agency side workflow system, like an Atlas Media Console or a DoubleClick Dart for advertisers. The reason for that is that they are running campaigns across numerous publishers, and they don't want to be looking at 20 different reports or 50 different reports in 50 different formats and trying to compare those. So they've got these workflow systems that actually run things across them in a very comprehensive manner, and they can actually compare things to each other. And then the last step is, or second to last step, is that the campaign would end, and somebody from the publisher, usually an account manager, would actually send the bill over to the advertising agency, where it would get handled if in a bigger agency by a billing coordinator, is going to sit there and start looking at that bill, and then they have to do something called billing and reconciliation. So as you can imagine, in a system like this where there's a lot of moving parts, I might buy 1 million impressions, 1 million eyeballs of my ad, and then I'm going to get a report in a bill from the publisher, and they may not have delivered what they said they delivered, or they may have over-delivered, or there may be some problems with that. That all has to get reconciled. And sometimes if the publisher under-delivers, they've got to go and do a make good. So they've got to, that agency would say, hey, you only delivered 800,000 impressions, not 1 million. I need those 200,000 impressions taken care of. And they'd say, well, you know, we'll throw 200,000 impressions plus another 200,000 impressions. We'll give 400,000 impressions to make up for that next month if you run another campaign with us. So it's kind of the meat of what happens in this industry from an operations standpoint. And it's very, very inefficient. And it's very, very manual. So we're in a market that is the last really big financial market that has not been automated. Everything's manual. There's phone calls and emails and faxes. The market's extremely opaque. If I make that phone call to the salesperson, I have no idea when I talk to them how many impressions they actually have available for sale. Of course, every salesperson's always going to say, well, you know, we're pretty busy right now. There's a lot of people looking for those impressions. Would you like some undercoat with that? The other part of this is that sales friction is both a positive and a negative force. So this process of manually selling the ads causes so much friction in the sales channel that a lot of that inventory just can't physically be sold. There's only a certain percentage of inventory, and it'll vary by publisher, that is able to be sold by the manual sales force, which leaves an immense amount of what's referred to as remnant inventory on the market, and that drives prices down because that remnant inventory is then sold at fire sale for a lot lower price. So what you'll see often, if you go to any major publisher and you start hitting the refresh button on the page, you might see a Pepsi ad, hit the refresh button, and you might see a Lending Tree ad. Well, those are two buyers that buy in completely different ways with completely different imperatives, and I can guarantee you that one of them is paying a lot more. That doesn't make everybody very happy. So you've got this opacity, inefficiency, a lot of issues. So we've got this complex dynamic with an extremely inefficient market, and advertisers are buying their inventory from publishers who can only sell N%, anywhere from 40 to 60% of their inventory they might be able to sell manually. The rest of it dumps into a remnant pool, which usually gets handled by ad networks. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that's been evolving. Now in traditional media, a typical typical buying group of about 100 people can usually deal with about 50 different publishing venues. So 50 different television networks, 50 different magazines, 50 different companies that are selling billboards. It's a very, very inefficient market. In digital media, that same size group is a lot more efficient. They're dealing with about 200, so one person is dealing with 2 publishers. That's obviously still very inefficient. Now, ad networks, where the remnant inventory gets sold, are a lot more efficient. They're dealing with, same size buying group, dealing with 20,000 publishers. But there are a lot of things that are lost in that process, mainly around where the ads are running. Usually ad network sells those ads blind. They're not saying, hey, you're buying these impressions that are going to run on MSN or they're going to run on Yahoo. They're not allowed to talk about that for the most part because the sales force that's manually selling those impressions doesn't want to reduce the value of their impressions that they're selling directly. So those are usually referred to as blind ad buys. So the ad networks have begun to bring efficiency to the market, but they're also driving prices down. And the modern ad networks are the beginnings of what I think the market will start to evolve into. We've got still, in most cases, people that are dealing with people. So it's a secondary market with a human sales force selling those ads in most ad networks. But a lot of them, and I think almost all of them at this point, have some kind of smarts where they're optimizing their buys. So an example might be if I'm an ad network and I'm going out and I'm buying impressions from Yahoo or MSN, I might be paying 10 cents or 20 cents per thousand, which is called CPM, cost per thousand, M being the Roman numeral. Now, I might be buying those impressions 10 cents, 20 cents per thousand on one of these bigger or even a smaller publisher, but I'm certainly not trying to sell them for the same price. The complexity is that a lot of people in the market want to buy on a cost per click or a cost per action, cost per conversion or sale, and the ad network is bought cost per thousand, so they bought volume, but they're selling performance in many cases. So their optimization systems will actually figure out how to optimize their own yield on behalf of the ad network, yield being sort of the inverse of ROI. It's how much the publisher can make on the sale of media. And the part that's interesting here is you've got these optimization systems really trying to increase the yield on behalf of the ad network. So we end up with a situation where the ad networks are getting a really nice margin on the ads that they're selling because they bought low and they're selling high. They're arbitraging. There are other types of ad networks that are more aggregators. Google AdSense would be an example of that, where they're actually dealing with publishers whose inventory is too small to sell on their own. So if I've got a few thousand impressions a month, I certainly can't sell those, but Google can because they can merge them all together into a big pool and they can sell them to advertisers as they go. Now, these markets, if any of you were in the Ad 101 session yesterday, you might have seen that the ad networks, either aggregators or arbitragers, are marking up and pulling margin on the order of 20 to 60% out of the ad ecosystem. So there's a long-term question about what value is being added besides liquidity and how long that's sustainable at those kinds of margins, but that's probably not a topic for today. Certainly it doesn't make the market more efficient when there's one party that's pulling a lot of that value out. So we've got a lot of innovation that's happened in this space because there's so much upside, and one of the big innovations has been the introduction of auction-based ad networks. So AdSense is one. Most of the big ad networks are also doing a little bit of auction-based work one way or another. And in these systems, it's much more efficient because it's auction-based and it's not requiring human intervention. So they provide automated interfaces for buying and selling, and people can come in and cut their deal without talking to someone. So that's an interesting innovation in the market, and it's made the market more efficient. But ultimately, ad networks, as I said, are still leveraging the inefficiency in the market because they're able to pull all of this extra revenue out. One of the big things that'll change this over time, we believe, is the ad exchange. So ad exchanges, as opposed to ad networks, are not pulling particularly a lot of revenue out. They're usually pulling out a fixed fee for matching transactions together. Now, one model that we think is the right model is what AdECN does, which is an ad exchange that we own, that they're really trying to match ad networks together to increase the efficiency, and increase the liquidity. But also another piece of this is that ad exchanges don't necessarily have to be blind. So where they're getting blind inventory in, certainly that inventory is remaining blind. But where somebody's plugging in and doesn't want to give blind inventory and they can actually get dollars that are a little more realistic compared to what they're selling for through a human sales force, they can actually have that be non-blind inventory. So we're actually decreasing opacity. We're making things more transparent with ad exchanges as opposed to ad networks, and increasing efficiency. So the rise of the ad exchange, over time we'll see this market evolving very similarly to how the stock exchange markets have evolved, the financial markets. And ultimately, we even expect that we'll see groups like hedge funds arise in these exchanges who are able to really play off of market inefficiency and make even more money. The piece that's in purple here, though, is kind of an interesting one to think about, and this is the idea of a data brokerage. So out in the market today, a lot of companies are assembling pools of information about audiences, and they're all doing those in, for the most part, very appropriate ways. They're doing it in anonymous ways that are not in any way affecting personal information. But they're only limited to the audience that they can touch. We believe one of the big things that will happen in this marketplace is that ad exchanges will allow various parties from throughout the industry, on the internet particularly, to inject their data into the ad exchanges and increase the value of those impressions. So what we really see is an opportunity for much more efficiency, but also incredible value add as each impression becomes more valuable as we know more about the audience. Now, I'm going to go back to that slide for a second. One of the things that's important to note here is that in any economic ecosystem, you're dealing with efficiencies that are really driven by having lots of participants, lots of advertisers, lots of publishers, lots of inventory, lots of viewers. You want to be matching lots of ads against lots of opportunities so that the end experience for the user, for the audience, is that they're getting most relevant ads to them in context and out of context. So if I love to ski, I'm probably going to want to ski ads related to skiing. I might actually buy some ski equipment. Doesn't mean if I have to see those ads on a skiing website. I might have injected my profile with information about the fact that I'm a skier when I'm on a skiing website, but then I've gone off and I'm checking my email or I'm doing other things. Ads that are related to skiing are going to be more interesting to me than ads that are related to other things. So this brings us to where the market's headed. And today, we're dealing with very manual optimization. So we saw that workflow process in the beginning with very manual phone calls back and forth and people looking at their reports. One of the things that happens today, although not very well, is that as an advertiser or a media buyer is looking at a campaign in real time, they're looking at the reports daily or every few days, and they're saying, boy, you know, this particular publisher, they're not performing at all. We don't like what we're seeing from these guys. We're going to yank them. We're going to take them right out of the mix. And what ends up happening is they'll manually optimize their campaign based on the data that they're reading. That's very complicated to do today. And in many cases, it's negative ROI. It's so manually intensive that it costs more to do sometimes than it's worth. So we believe ultimately we're in a world with automated optimization. So instead of a media buyer sitting down and translating the goals of the advertiser into a very manually executed media buy across lots of publishers, they're really dealing with translating those goals into business rules. And those business rules will be able to be put into automated systems. Those automated systems will be able to figure out, based on the goals of the advertiser, what's going on across the campaign. There's also a piece here that's important to recognize, that there's so much inefficiency in the market that it sometimes benefits the advertiser. So some examples, I think one of the better examples is actually the new Beetle. When Volkswagen launched the new Beetle, they expected to be selling the new Beetle to young people that were buying their first car. It was inexpensive and it was kind of cool, and they thought that that's really the market they were going to go after, and they ran their ads against that market. What they found out, though, was that the majority of buyers of this market of that product were actually baby boomers who were reminiscing for the old Beetle, and older adults who were very design conscious. So over the course of a year or two, they completely shifted their creative, their market, where they were buying ads, and that was reflected. I mean, if you can recall that time period, there was a lot of change in those ads. They started to go after more of a baby boomer aesthetic, and that was a really great thing. But if they hadn't been running those ads on inefficient media where they were exposing the product to lots of different people, they wouldn't have seen the same result. So there was some happy benefit to some waste that was in quotes, waste that was going on in their market. In an automated world where ultimately we'll be able to really target and even hyper or micro-target our audiences, there's danger in that because we might actually be seeing that our initial assumptions about the target audience might be wrong. And we need to make sure that over time, as we're building these automated systems, that they'll do control group testing and automated experiments that will actually test across groups that are not the target audience that we start out with. So there's some big changes in the way that media buying and media selling operate. So in this world where we have access to a huge number of impressions across a huge audience, that becomes very interesting. So exchanges are gravitating toward auction-based sales. And in a world where we've got these automated optimization systems that can look at each impression in real time. So I go to a page, I look at an ad, and as in the milliseconds before that ad is displayed to me, all this background stuff is going on with extremely powerful compute systems that are actually looking at all of the attributes about me, anonymous, but attributes about me. And they're saying, hey, this person is whatever, 40 years old, lives in the Northwest, has a pretty good income, has children, is a skier, is a mountain biker, likes to do these things. And it's picking out those attributes in real time based on information that's been collected about me over the course of time. And it's saying, hey, for our product, according to our business rules, we think this person is worth a lot more than somebody who maybe is in a completely different demographic. And it can bid on those impressions in real time and make very smart decisions about how that campaign is optimized. That's a very, very different world than we're in today. We're not there yet. Nobody is. This is really future looking. But that's ultimately where the market needs to head. Which brings us to this world that I'll call the automated agency. So technologists, and I did this myself when I first started in the ad space back in the late 90s, always make the wrong assumption about advertising. The assumption is usually, hey, you know what? We're going to try to disintermediate the one player we think will give us the most benefit. And that usually ends up being the media agency. And there couldn't be a more wrong assumption to make. Media agencies have all the power in the market. They control ad spend. And maybe if you were very powerful and able to go after them the right way, you could disintermediate them, but it's highly unlikely. In fact, media agencies are one of the strongest partnerships within the relationship between an advertiser and the market. The CMO gets taken out to lunch a lot by the media agency, and they go golfing a lot, and they spend a lot of time together. And at the very least, the simplest acid test for this whole thing is, what CMO doesn't want to have somebody to fire if they're not working out? They don't want to be on the hook for all of the results of their marketing decisions. So it's unlikely that those media agencies are going away. But the question is, how do they evolve? Because today that they're really compensated in ways that are based on the manual nature of the market. So one of the ways that media agencies will evolve, I believe, is they will evolve much like the financial services market evolved, where we used to have rooms of people with adding machines dealing with the financial services industry, and that evolved over time to small groups of analysts that were much more technical and that could write linear and algorithmic business rules. So what I would expect to happen is that these agency self-service tools, like an Atlas Media Console, will have these optimizers, these black box optimizers that will do a pretty good job for you if you want to take the sort of off-the-shelf algorithms and off-the-shelf UI-based business rules. But if you're an agency, a very sophisticated agency that's dealing with very large advertisers, you'll actually have situations where you want the ability to differentiate against your competitors. You want to adopt these optimization engines, but you need to be able to write your own business rules and to really dive deeply into the way that the market actually is operating. So this is ultimately the vision I have of how the market will evolve. We'll end up in this world with very, very automated systems and big changes in the way that ad agencies particularly intersect with the market. So in the future, you remember those other slides, we had 100 people dealing with a few publishers, as many as 20,000 maybe. You'll have 10, maybe 20, maybe 30 analysts dealing with millions and millions and millions of publishers through ad exchanges, and they'll be able to optimize these campaigns in real time. So this is just a sort of cohesive example of what one system might look like in the future, where we've got the Atlas Media Console and Ad ECN and Microsoft's ad networks all interacting with each other the right way. So before I move on from that, any questions about it? Yes? Can you use the microphone?
In order for this to work, the optimizer and the agency will need to know the demographics of each site. Mm-hmm. How will they do that?
Sure. So there's a big question about how we'll assemble what we think of as audience intelligence over the course of time. And there are a lot of things that can be done just by watching behavior that we can follow. So you go to a skiing website, we think maybe you're a skier. There's other ways that this can be done as well through watching even short-term behavior. I was working with a startup recently that has the ability to watch set-top box behavior through the remote, and within 15 seconds or something, they're able to figure out sorry, not 15 seconds, a little bit longer, maybe a few minutes. They're able to figure out, based on remote control behavior, if you're male or female, because men have very different behaviors with remote controls, as many of us will know, than women do. So there's a lot of ways that will happen over time. Additionally, though, there's a lot of opt-in information. So if you come to a website and you join the website, you give them some demographic information about yourself. There's some basic information that can be captured about you. And as your relationship with any particular advertiser or publisher starts to improve over time, you can do more and more with that information. All right.
Can I?
Oh, sorry, didn't see you there.
I work for a company called Multimap. We're a big mapping company in the UK. Mm-hmm. And we're already doing a lot of geo-targeted advertising. So, for example, someone in the UK looking at a map of Paris, we look at the IP address and then what they're looking at and can target cross-channel train journeys and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. How do you get across that differentiated value proposition in this highly automated approach?
Well, I think the data from all of these various sources can be input against each other, and context matters a lot, right? So if I'm in a modality where I'm looking at maps, the system has to take that into account, and we can build business rules around that. That's actually, none of this is easy, but it's possible, certainly.
But in terms of the sales process, in terms of getting the higher CPMs for that product, essentially, mm-hmm. Is there still a regular sales process that goes in this?
Well, yeah, I didn't go into a lot of detail on this, but this is a really interesting area to talk about. I believe that we're looking at a world where the amount of inventory that's sold, and I have a slide on this, might even be the next one. Jump forward. So I think this slide starts to answer this. So today, the yield curve, the sales methods today are that we've got a certain amount of inventory that's sold through a premium sales force and a certain amount of inventory that's sold through a remnant sales force on the ad network. But eventually we move to a world like this one, where we've got a lot smaller amount of inventory that's sold by a sales force and a lot more inventory that's being automated, where the yield is being dealt with automatically with automated optimization. And additionally, there'll be a small piece now of unoptimized remnant, and then the rest of the inventory will just be completely or very low value or completely valueless. Ultimately, there are a lot of people that will never match the pool of available advertisers, or at least some percentage of the audience. And these are just illustrative. There's no data behind these. It's just examples of what we think will happen. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So let me back up. Are there any more questions about this before I move on? Okay. So the other part of this is very important to wrap your head around is that buy-side systems, agency systems, advertiser systems, where there's buyers behind them, always have to work with all of the sell-side systems. There's never going to be a situation where an agency is going to adopt a platform or a product, a system, where they can only deal with a couple of publishers. They just can't do that. So by very nature of the market, those buy-side systems are going to be open and going to be able to plug into whatever platforms exist, both exchanges and directly with publishers. So it's an important piece of this mix because ultimately that'll shift quite a bit over time. And the ability to go in and optimize across multiple exchanges where you have just a vast amount of data available to you is going to be very important. So we just walked through these slides. I'll just quickly hit them again. So we've got today a premium sales force and a remnant sales force via ad networks. And this is a pretty typical yield curve. And over time, we believe that this automation of optimization will significantly increase the yield on a big chunk of the inventory. And ultimately, we end up with this very efficient, seamless ecosystem where we've got data pumping back and forth through these data brokerages into ad exchanges. Each of the publisher side systems today, for the most part, have their own audience intelligence. And ultimately, we end up with the consumer, making sure I'm not going too late here, the consumer and the audience all interacting, the audience interacting across all of these different publishers, all these different advertisers able to, in an automated way, and connect with the audience and get their message in front of them. So the goal for advertising is always just that ability to increase sales. I want to sell something, whether it's a service or a product. It's all about driving demand. So this is a way we believe this can be done in a much more efficient manner. Now, before I move on, that doesn't mean that the part of the conversation about what the message is and what the ad content isn't important. It actually becomes much more important. And the human element is incredibly important as well. It's not, this is not to say that automation will remove humans from the process completely. It just means that the parts of the system that are very, very high friction today will become lower friction. And there is some question about that sales friction, the value of it, the way that it increases value in the market today, what that actually means, and if we're actually reducing some important factors by automating things. And I think that there are ways that we can inject some of the value of the sales friction into the process without injecting the actual slowdown. But that's for a more detailed conversation. So what about architecture? How do we really leverage platforms? Microsoft, as I hope you all know, is really a platform company. And the way that we leverage the market and the way that we really provide value as a company is by becoming the basis of an ecosystem. So what kind of an architecture are we talking about? Well, today, this is actually a very accurate slide. I think it's got the vast majority of, in quote, platforms that are in the market today across mostly the display industry. Each one of these applications exists in a silo. There's very few open APIs. Those open APIs that exist, even in the search space, are really not as open, stable, and complete as we would like to see. And it's very complicated for all these different companies to talk to each other. Even within an agency, one agency might have 4 or 5 different applications that they're using, none of which talk to each other. So there's literally a person opening up an application over here, and maybe on another monitor or another machine, they're opening up another one, and they're manually rekeying the data. That's crazy. So the platform that we hope to see in the future, this is idealized, but this is, I think, what would do it, is a layer-based system with services and applications that are all plug and play built on top of each other. You should be able to assemble a buy-side reserved ad management system off of the building blocks of the platform. And you should be able to move to a world where not only the platform that in question by any one company has other pieces and components that can be outside of the platform that are interacting with each other. So you might have a world where an ad network would exist built off of some of the core services that are available, hosted externally, but also pulling in external audience data from the various sources. That's one example. You can come up with an infinite number of permutations here. So ultimately, we would like to see the Microsoft stack expand to include advertising in a very holistic way. We really believe that you should be able to seamlessly add advertising into any content, any application, any device. And if you're on the Microsoft stack, you can pull all of these different platforms together with each other. You should be able to build very, very seamless businesses and very automated fashion move through working on your technology. Your software should be very seamlessly integrated with advertising. So that's the section I have on architecture before I move on to the next section, which is a lot more sort of fun and interesting. This has been a little bit dry. Any questions about that? Because I don't know if that's the first time we've heard that kind of a thing. This is my last slide, but we can leave it up for the rest of the conversation. So I have to, in a sense, apologize to you because the presentation I used to give about the future of advertising was really sexy. It was a lot of video, a lot of demos, a lot of applications that I would run and show you all this cool stuff that we thought would be happening in the future. And I really haven't done that today. I've pulled this presentation much more in line with what I think is actually more important. But at the same time, there's a lot of very cool stuff coming. So we've got a world where the new technologies, I mean, just forget about even the stuff up here for a second. Let's talk about Moore's Law. I mean, the compute power that's going to be available in the next 5 years is so much more powerful than anything we've seen before that questions we couldn't even ask 5 years ago, questions we would like to have asked, but we knew we couldn't ask because the processing power wasn't there to actually figure out the answers. Those things will all be there. Just from an analytics standpoint, which is a very fundamental piece of advertising, you'll be able to do a lot more. So I'll talk through some of these. And again, I'd love people to come up and start asking more questions. There's lots of things we could discuss. But some of the examples of things that are coming. Who's seen the demo that's floating around on the internet, which is very future thinking about, I think it's a Nokia demo about the power of nanotechnology and consumer devices. Has anyone seen that? So go to YouTube, go to your video provider of choice. It's very, very cool. And it talks about, with nanotechnology, the way that consumer electronics devices will be impacted over the course of the next 10 years. The interesting thing about it, just simple stuff, is that the power in batteries is going to go up significantly. And the types of surfaces on these devices will be much more flexible. They'll be dirt resistant. They'll be able to be transparent with electronics embedded at the molecular level. Very, very cool stuff. You'll be able to come up with much more flexible devices that can stretch, fold, unfold, wrap around your wrist, wear them as a pendant, whatever you want to do. But it's the same device. So that's a little bit of a stretch. I think the demo does a pretty good job of showing the kinds of things that will be possible, but it's actually coming. Hyper-targeting. The ability for us to both hyper-target an individual and assemble an ad that is absolutely relevant to them and that shows them exactly what kinds of things that they should see is almost there now, but it's going to be even more there in the future. The pieces that are missing today are mostly around the automation of the creative. the automation of changing that creative in a way that will allow it to be very hyper-targeted to you. And that ties very well in with the next one, which is personalized product offerings. I mean, Nike's doing some amazing things now with allowing you to go in and build your own shoes. The car manufacturers are doing amazing things with Mini Cooper, where you can go in and build a really custom Mini Cooper, or Scion going and building a very custom car. That trend is only going to increase over time, and there's no reason that necessarily even wearing the same pair of shoes or driving the same car, that it has to look almost anything alike. Another huge thing that I think a lot of people haven't wrapped their head around is what's going to happen with video and the display. So projectors are becoming incredibly cheap, especially low-resolution projectors, and for a lot of applications, that's all you need. If you want to be able to have the information about what you're about to cook, which is called a recipe, thank you, right onto the counter in front of you in your kitchen, you don't need a high-resolution display to do that. A low-resolution display can project the words in a very readable fashion in front of you, and you can actually be rolling your dough over the words as you're rolling it. Those kinds of experiences, or even movable wallpaper, or wallpaper in the room that changes according to what you're watching on television, or wallpaper that changes according to the mood. Maybe you want stars on the wall, maybe you want flowers on the wall. Those kinds of things are going to happen very soon as the inexpensive LED projectors start rolling out into the market. Another example is some of the very flexible displays. So OLED, organic light emitting diodes, are in the market today, but they're not in the market the way they will be soon, where even today, a lot of the OLED displays, especially the lower resolution ones, are actually printed using inkjet printing. Industrial inkjet printers print the screen right onto the substrate. And OLED, there's no reason that it can't be printed onto something that's flexible. So I've actually seen examples of OLED displays printed onto plastic that can be rolled, can be folded, and it's very cool. I think the most far-reaching one, though, is the idea of disposable video displays. So Siemens, a couple years ago, announced this technology. It hasn't come to market yet, but it should be coming to market. Very inexpensive disposable displays that can be printed using inkjet, again, right onto any substrate. And even the batteries that are used with this are printable. So you end up with a situation where it'll start out with electronics equipment where you can press a button, a virtual button almost, on the box, and see an instructional video on how to set up your electronic equipment. But eventually it's going to move on to potato chip bags, walking down the aisle in the store, and the Wheaties box will have video motion on it, especially as battery power becomes better. So there's a lot of stuff coming. Now, that could be used for good or evil, but it's coming one way or another. And then the last most important piece from an advertising perspective is all about measurement. I've had this conversation with people before. What are you buying when you buy an ad? Well, you're actually buying a report. You're buying a report that tells you what happened as a result of running that ad. And the data is what it's all about. So there's a big question about how we track behavior that goes beyond just what happened on the computer or on a very online experience, even across devices. Ultimately, we need to be able to track actual behavior in the real world. And that's being done today. There are a variety of companies that are able to do panel-based measurement. There's a company called IMMI, as an example, that's founded by a guy named Tom Zito, who is the founder of GarageBand and a few other amazing startups. He's got a company that's using existing technologies like cell phones, where he has a panel of people that have these free cell phones that they get to use for a certain number of minutes a month that track their location, but they also track audio. They record 5 seconds of audio every 15 seconds, and turn that into a digital fingerprint, and match that against audio fingerprints they're trying to measure. And they can actually measure any audio signal that you're exposed to during the course of a day, including cinema, including radio in your car, including anything that you hear. And it's not recording your audio and sending an audio clip back. It's actually just translating it into a fingerprint so that you can match it against that kind of a thing. And because it's a GPS phone, they know where you are when you hear it. Because it's a phone with Bluetooth, when you go through the checkout, if they've got a Bluetooth reader, they can read it. There's an immense amount of stuff that you can do with that. And that's just the very beginning. RFID is, a lot of people don't realize that the RFID tags that are in many of the products that they buy can both read and write. And they can operate in such a way, we have 5 minutes left. They can operate in such a way that that you could buy a product, this is in the future, take it home and put it on your own RFID reader writer and put some information into that product that will stay with it as long as you own it. That can be used for things like dropping your clothes into the washer and the washer automatically warning you if you put a red shirt in with all your whites. It could be used for setting the temperature of the washing machine automatically. It can be used to track where your products are. There's a lot of things that it could be used for. A lot of bad things it could be used for too if it's not appropriately monitored and dealt with. So RFID is an incredible technology, and it's out there in the world right now. It's just a question of how it gets used over the course of the next 10 years or so that will really impact us as people. 2D barcodes, there are QR codes, as an example, that are very popular in Japan, where you can take a picture with your camera phone of a 2D barcode, and it'll translate the data that's in that barcode into your phone and either send you a text message, save it, or pull up a WAP site with information for you. And additionally, you'll be able to have the 2D barcode on your phone and swipe it across the checkout for coupons and things like that. So very cool stuff coming with that. Mentioned Bluetooth, but Bluetooth and other short, even Wi-Fi, other technologies for two-way communications are going to be really important in the future for how all of this information gets tracked and stored as you walk around with a phone in your pocket, which is the likely device for a lot of this to happen on. It's the one thing besides your car keys and your wallet that probably everybody in the room has. And then the very last thing I'll mention is neural scanning technologies, and it's very interesting to me that Nielsen just bought a company that's doing this. They actually have devices that they put on your head, and they can measure the brand impact of seeing an ad. That's pretty cool. They know what parts of the brain are impacted by various types of emotions, and they can actually map your brain so they can understand that as a result of seeing that ad, I now like that brand or I now dislike that brand. What was the impact of it? And they can measure you over time and see the change in that. They've done some interesting studies that show that Coca-Cola customers and Pepsi customers have different types of brains. So there's a lot of stuff coming. I've thrown a bunch of information at you. I think the thing to keep in mind is that for both very large businesses and for much smaller businesses, advertising is about to get much more efficient, automated, useful, both as a business and as a consumer. Advertising is a huge driver of the economy, and it's good for the economy that we get better at advertising and it's more efficient. We'll usually see more ad spend when it becomes more efficient. And that's pretty much what I have to talk to you about today. And I can take a few more questions. We don't have too much time left, but so we've got one person here.
When you're talking about personalized product offerings and hyper-targeted personalized advertising, right now, I had a conversation with someone yesterday about this whole CPA versus CPM idea, where a lot of advertisers don't want to buy CPM anymore because they don't feel like they're actually getting anything for it. Okay, 1 million people saw my ad. How do I see that actually impacts my money, right? So, but then you have publishers who don't want to publish CPAs because they know that, I see an ad, I click on it, I'm not going to buy something right then and there. It's like, oh, I want the new Windows Home server. Chances are I'll click on the ad, I'll read it, I'll go home to a different computer, so I'm no longer tracked.
Right.
And then I'll buy it from Best Buy, right?
Sure.
So how does this hyper-targeted marketing track my interaction with the hyper-targeted advertising so that whoever originally gave me the idea to purchase the product gets some revenue out of me actually purchasing the product 2 weeks down the line?
Sure.
Because I think that would somehow have to be solved for this to be viable. And right now, like, I'm thinking, you know, the Minority Report thing where they see your
Sure.
eye and then they talk to you with the name and everything. And I'm confused about how that would actually benefit the advertiser. No, sorry, the publisher.
Okay.
Okay.
So yes, sort of a complex question, and I'll try to break it down. The question really is, how does this stuff actually get tracked so that everybody gets appropriately rewarded? And there are a bunch of answers to that. The short-term answer is that mechanism is called conversion attribution today. And conversion attribution has been a problem from the very beginning of this industry. It's an area that I personally am really, really actively involved in. The way that the systems work today on the advertiser side for measuring results is that they track back to the most recent impact of marketing before a conversion takes place. So just in the online channel, we're not even talking about all this other complexity. If I buy a product as the result of something, whatever the most recent marketing impact was will be what gets rewarded for that. So I was part of some studies a long time ago on this, about 3-4 years ago now, where we actually tracked all marketing impacts across a 90-day window for people that were buying stuff. And what we found was that when you do that most recent track back, that you're actually missing a lot because almost every case, organic search wins. So followed by paid search, followed by email marketing, followed by display advertising. What we found was that people that were actually seeing impressions of ads but not clicking on them, but then coming back later and doing an organic search and clicking on the company's website were much more likely to convert. And over time, were much more valuable customers. So in the short term, what's going on there is within Atlas, they've added some features around conversion attribution that really start honing in and letting the advertiser be much more dynamic about how they're looking at that data, and which is a great short-term process, and it needs to happen. Long-term, though, there need to be much better cross-marketing analytics, and we need to be pulling things like IMMI and other technologies out there that allow these offline tracking events to take place. Even with panels, we can get pretty accurate on what the impact was on the results of an ad. So I think there's a lot more coming. It's just going to take some time. I think you might have been next.
I'm just kind of wondering how trends like user-generated content are going to mesh with advertising when you've got dynamic content created by peers in blogs and comments and just that the audience or the people using computers want to interact more. And that's going to, it seems to me like it's going to have a very big impact on how advertising is done.
Yeah, it's a fad. It's going away. That's a joke. It is not going away, and it is not a fad. Yes, it will, and it's very complicated. And that idea of hyper-targeting and hyper-personalization of the ads is going to play into that somewhat. There's a lot of data that comes out of social networking. Our Ad Labs group that does a lot of research and data mining had some pretty cool stuff that they were working on a while ago about doing the social map and trying to understand how we could map that to ad stuff. You know, there's a lot of questions, but I think ultimately we'll be mapping influencers within a social graph against how we're advertising, and you want to be targeting those influencers so that they're influencing the people around them. As an example, if we do really good hyper-targeting of young mothers for Pampers, does that mean we don't want to show the Pampers ad to the grandmother? I don't know. So there's a lot coming. Yes?
Yep. I have two questions. One, you were talking about a future system for advertising where, is that only for the online or you're looking for the other medias? So, and kind of a related question is this what Google is now buying print ads and you can buy print ads through Google. Is this the direction you're talking about or is it something different?
Yes.
That's my first question.
Yeah.
The second one is you're talking about a new system, again, the same point, and you're saying the ad revenue is growing like 5%. Is this all going to increase the pie and going to make available in new media? Or it's purely a Microsoft online way of looking at things?
Okay.
Thanks.
So I'll give you my opinion on both those, and my memory's terrible for short-term stuff like that, so you'll have to remind me of the first question. I'll do the second one first. I think the whole overall pie is going to grow. Advertising typically grows to the amount that it impacts things. And because we haven't been able to measure the impact very well, it's grown a certain amount. So I think we're going to see the amount of dollars spent on advertising grow. It'll grow in a bunch of different ways. Typically, advertisers who are very focused on ROI and direct response will increase their own budgets infinitely, as long as they're ROI positive on the ads, to the amount of inventory that exists that matches their criteria. So the more inventory that we can expose to them with that kind of a tracking criteria, the more that they'll spend over time, right? They won't double their budget from year to year, but they'll increase their budget over time as they're getting positive ROI in their ads. As we expand the definition of ROI to include things like long-term value, long-term brand awareness, long-term purchase intent, brand loyalty, things that impact the company in other ways, we'll be able to include those things in that matrix. I'm talking about. So the question is, are we talking about online view, which was the first question, right? So it's easiest in the online. I'll give you my opinion on this. This isn't necessarily a Microsoft opinion. This is what I believe will happen. I believe that up to the point of distribution, everything is going to be run on the same exact systems. All right, so the buying and the selling, negotiation process, all of that will be done on the same systems across all media, because that's all nuts and bolts stuff. It's not very difficult to differentiate. The question is, what is different by distribution mechanism? And that's a complicated question. Are we very likely to have maybe an RFID tag inside of every magazine that goes out that gets read by your phone so that we can track that you read that magazine? Yeah, I think so, eventually. But the trend is for most of these things to start becoming electronically or digitally distributed, and it'll be interesting to see how those curves overlap and how quickly things transition versus how many new technologies for reading things in the offline world come into play. So it's an interesting question, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much for coming.